For today's lesson, our focus standard is still coming from Grade 8 Functions, Standard A, Define, Evaluate, and Compare Functions. Our topic for this video lesson is Mathematical Models Comparing Views, Graphs to Tables. Our essential question is, how do we compare functions expressed in different views? So today we're going to jump right into it, looking at a story problem that involves some data represented in a graph and some data represented in a table. Let's take a look. Antonio and Owen are two high school students at Cleveland High School who have both gotten jobs to help save money for college. Compare the data from each of the two boys. Who started with the most money in their savings? Who is saving more money a month? After 2 years, who will have the most money in their savings account? So you can see here we have Owen's savings represented on a graph. I want you to take a moment and kind of read through and make sure you understand like what the scale is, what are the variables that are represented on this graph. And then we have Antonio's savings. And he is using a table to show his, and we can see that he's keeping track of number of months and the money in the savings account. At months is X, money in the savings account is Y. And if we look over at Owen's, on the x-axis we have number of months, so it tells us these numbers down here with a scale of 5 are telling us the number of months. And on the y-axis we have the amount of money in his savings account. So make sure you go ahead and copy these down, and then we're going to begin answering these questions, taking a look at how can we compare when some of the data is in a graph and some of the data is in the table. So for our first question, and I took this directly from the story problem, who started with the most money in their savings? This question, as we've been talking about slope-intercept form, what is it asking you to find? So we've been looking at linear relationships. We know they have a slope. We know they have a rate of change. If we're asking who started with the most money in their savings account, what might be the most helpful? And there's some cues here, right? I realize I probably uncovered a little too much. But the question is asking you to find the starting value, because it asked who started with the most money. And the starting value is also known as the y-intercept. So for Owen's, can you find what his starting value is from the graph? And for Antonio's, can you find what the starting value is from his table? So I've gone ahead and zoomed in here on Owen's graph to make sure that we can really read it closely. And so earlier I said it's a scale of 5, but that's on the x-axis for the number of months. It's really a scale of 1. These lighter grid lines are all worth 1. We can see that because it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it goes up to 25 if we extend it all the way to the edge of the graph, or maybe 24. And then what is the scale on the y-axis? So the main grid lines are going 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. So the main grid lines are counting by 2,000s, but then there are 4 smaller grid lines. So halfway would be 1,000, and then 2,000, 3,000. So that then means every line from here to there must be 500. So it'd be 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500, 4,000. Just to make sure that we can read the numbers accurately. So we were trying to find what is Owen's starting value. And so we know that starting value comes from the y-intercept. So here's the y-axis. When x is 0, this is the y-axis, and it looks like it crosses perfectly right here. And what is that value? That'd be $500. So Owen started with $500. So let's go ahead and scroll down and fill that in. So Owen, his B value is 500. So we could say, well, Owen starts with $500 in his savings account. So what about Antonio? Let's take a look over here at Antonio. His data is represented in the table. So where are we going to find it here? We have to do a little thinking about how it was on the graph when x is 0, we're on the y-axis. And so here in his table, when x is 0, at 0 months, he has $100. So 100 must be his starting value. So Antonio's starting value is 100, and we would say then that Antonio starts with $100. So in our question, who started with the most money, we would say, well, if Owen has $500 and Antonio started with 100, then Owen started with more money in their savings account. So what else do we want to compare? Starting value is just one thing, right? That rate of change, though, how quickly are they saving money is another important thing. So let's take a closer look at our graph. Well, first let's uncover our next question, right? We know the question was asking who is saving more money a month. That is asking if we want to know more a month. So this wants us to break it down over every month. How much is it increasing? That's another way of asking for the rate of change, or that slope value. So from the graph and from the table, we want to be able to find the rate of change. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in again so that we can see it a little bit better. And I want you to go ahead and see if you can calculate the slope from the graph as well as from the table. So here I've gone ahead and zoomed in again. And remember, to find the slope, it's best if you can find a few intersection points. So, and then calculate that slope triangle, and what's the vertical change in y and the vertical change in x. Go ahead and try that out, and then pausing the video to do so, and then let's compare our work. Alright, so let's take a look here. I've gone ahead and I found my slope triangle here for Owen, and there's quite a few where it goes up and then over 2 and then up and then over 2 and then up and then over 2. And you could have used any of these points, and you are gonna have some similar value. You may have done the exact same ones as I, but if you did some other ones, wait for a moment. So I found my change in y to be 500 because it went up one grid line, and on this we talked about it having a scale of 500. And then it went to the right, the change in x was 2. We talked about how the scale on the y-axis was 1. So my rate of change is going to be 500 over 2. And then we may want to simplify that. And then I went ahead and I did the same thing with Antonio's, right? We need to find that change in x and that change in y. So I found the changes each time. It was increasing by 5 for the x's. And his savings account for Antonio appeared to be adding $2,500 each time. So now let's go ahead and do some work with what we just found here. So we were trying to find out who is saving more a month, and we said, well, if it's asking more, how much money are they saving each month or a month, and they're talking about the rate of change. So we wanted to calculate the M value for both of them, and we did. So with Owens, we said it was a change in y of 500 over 2, and so we want to simplify that always, and so we got 250. So Owen is saving $250 a month. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for Antonio. So we found his change in y and his change in x from up here, and we had 2,500 over 5. If I divide both of those by 5, then that's equal to 500 over 1. I could have also just divided 2,500 by 5, and I would have gotten to 500. And so Antonio is saving $500 a month. So who's saving more? Well, it looks like Antonio is. He's saving twice as much. So Antonio is saving more. So Owen started with more. He started with $500 in his savings account, but Antonio is saving more. So what is your prediction? After 2 years, who will have the most money in their savings account? So we could go back up and look at the table and the graph and see if we can find that. One thing we have to pay attention to is that this question is asking us after 2 years, and our table and our graph are both in months. We have to think and say, well, they're asking us 2 years would be 24 months. And so let's take a look and see if we can find that information. On Antonio's table, it doesn't go up to 24. We could do some more work, but we'd have to do some different calculations, and we could, but it only goes up to 20 months. On Owen's, we can find 24 months right here, and we can follow it up. At least I think, am I on 23 or 24? And that's one of the things that becomes a problem, especially with a small graph. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is, it's this really small line. So it looks like it would be 6,500, but it's sometimes hard to tell. And so I left a little tip down here. So Antonio's table doesn't go up high enough. And on Owen's graph, we can try, but we want a more precise value. So this is a good question when you're asking to be found an exact value, to go ahead and create an equation. So we've been learning how to translate between the three views. And so here we want to translate them both into an equation using this information. We've already found their rate of change, and we found their b values, their starting values. So now we just have to write the equation. So go ahead and write the equation for both Owen and Antonio, and then let's compare there. For Owen's equation, I got y equals 250x plus 500. So in the y equals mx plus b, his rate of change is 250. His starting value is a positive 500, and that matches with what we have up here. For Antonio's equation, I got y equals 500x plus 100. Again, you are using slope-intercept form in the y equals mx plus b, so his m, or his rate of change, is $500 a month, and he started with a savings at starting value of $100 in his savings. So now what we can do, and this is where the equation is really handy, we want to know in 2 years, which is 24 months, who will have the most money. So what we can do is just go ahead and plug in here 24 in for x, and we can do that on both sides into our equation, and now we can just calculate it. So I'm going to pause here and see if you can go ahead and calculate it, and then we'll compare our answers and see if we agree. So once we plug that in, I still want you to follow order of operations. It's a good idea to show each step. And so if we go ahead and do that, then we're going to see that 24 times 250 is 6,000, and then we're adding 500 onto it. So for Owen, after 24 months, he's going to have $6,500. So then for Antonio, if we finish that equation, we multiply 24 times 500, we should get 12,000. And we add 100 onto that, we get 12,100. So in 24 months, Antonio will have 12,100. So the question was, after 2 years, who will have the most money in their savings account? And the answer is Antonio. All right, that concludes our video for today on comparing data in the graph form and in a table form to be able to do some analysis. Please make sure that your notes are complete and come ready to do more work like this in class.